Emily had always considered herself a careful person. Her life was orderly, predictable, and comfortable. She had a steady job in marketing at a small but respected company in Portland, a cozy apartment with soft lighting and minimal clutter, and a husband, Daniel, who loved her quietly and faithfully. On paper, Emily had everything she could want. Yet in the quiet moments when the office was empty, when Daniel was asleep, when the rain tapped against her window, she felt a subtle emptiness she could not quite name. Life had grown routine, okay? And she sometimes wondered if she had allowed herself to grow invisible within it. It was on one of those rainy evenings, when the city seemed to hum softly under the downpour, that Emily decided to take a walk to clear her head. She wrapped herself in a thick coat, pulled her umbrella tight, and stepped into the gray streets. The rain fell steadily, washing the familiar cityscape in a reflective sheen that made streetlights glimmer like scattered stars. Emily's steps were aimless. She wasn't heading anywhere in particular. She just wanted to escape the weight of her own thoughts for a while as she turned a corner near a side street she had rarely visited. She noticed a small cafe tucked between two brick buildings. It had a warm, inviting glow, golden light spilling onto the wet sidewalk, and a little sign swinging gently above the door. Something about it felt different from the chain cafes she usually frequented. She found herself drawn to it almost instinctively, like a magnet. Without thinking, she pushed the door open, and a soft bell announced her arrival. The interior was intimate and quiet, with wooden tables and chairs, soft amber lighting, and shelves of books lining the walls. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, a comforting mix that made Emily immediately relax. Behind the counter stood a man who caught her attention instantly. He had kind eyes that seemed to notice her before she even spoke, and a smile that felt genuine, unforced, and warm. He looked up from wiping a mug and greeted her with a soft, "Hi there. What can I get you?" Emily felt a strange flutter in her chest. She cleared her throat, smiled, and ordered a cappuccino. When he asked her name to write on the cup, she felt a small, surprising thrill at the simple exchange. His voice was calm, reassuring, and for some reason, the sound of it seemed to linger in her mind long after he had spoken. As she waited for her drink, Emily glanced around the cafe, noticing small details that made it feel almost magical. The soft jazz playing from the corner speaker, the faint aroma of vanilla and cinnamon from the pastries, the way the rain outside painted everything in soft reflections. She had never been here before, yet it felt like she had walked into a place that understood her, even if it didn't know her at all. When her cappuccino was ready, she sat at a small table by the window. She took a sip and the warmth spread through her, melting some of the tension she had carried all day. She looked back at the counter and caught the man's eye again. He nodded politely, and Emily realized, with a subtle jolt, that she wanted him to speak to her not out of necessity, but out of curiosity, almost longing. A few minutes later, he approached her table with a gentle smile. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. Emily shook her head, and he pulled out a chair. They started talking casually, first about the weather, then about books, then about small personal interests. His name was Jason, and Emily found herself drawn to the way he listened. He didn't just hear her words. He seemed to understand the feelings behind them. There was a subtle intensity in his gaze that made Emily feel visible in a way she hadn't felt in years. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from trivial topics to personal stories. Jason talked about his travels, his love for art, and the little adventures he took on weekends. Emily shared fragments of her life, her childhood, her quiet routines, and her small dreams that she rarely admitted aloud. It was innocent, yet there was a tension underneath, a quiet electricity that made her heart beat faster. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in a long time. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. The rain outside slowed, the streets glistened, and Emily felt caught in a bubble outside her usual life. She knew this feeling was risky. She was married, and Daniel had always been a steady, loving presence in her life. But in that moment, she allowed herself to feel the thrill of curiosity. There was no crossing of boundaries yet. No betrayal, in actions only the awakening of feelings she had neglected for too long. When she finally left the cafe, the sky had darkened and the street lamps reflected off the wet pavement like scattered jewels. She walked slowly, the memory of Jason's warm smile lingering in her mind. She couldn't shake the sensation that something important had begun, something that might change her life if she allowed it. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was asleep beside her, breathing steadily, unaware of the storm of thoughts in her head. Guilt and excitement mingled together in a confusing mix. She didn't want to hurt Daniel, and yet she couldn't deny the spark she had felt. She realized she had taken a small risk by talking to someone new, by allowing herself to feel something outside her routine. The risk itself thrilled her, and she whispered quietly to herself, almost in disbelief, "Maybe I need to take a risk, just to see if I still can." Her mind wandered, imagining future conversations, small shared smiles, and the possibility of exploring emotions she had long ignored. She felt alive and fragile at the same time, a combination that left her both exhilarated and anxious. For the first time in years, Emily recognized that life could hold surprises, that she could still feel the stirrings of new connection and excitement, even within the bounds of her orderly existence. As she drifted into a restless sleep, Emily realized that this single evening, this one decision to step off her familiar path and enter a small, glowing cafe had opened a door she could never close. She didn't yet know where it would lead or what choices she would face. But she knew one thing with certainty: her life, for the first time in years, felt unpredictable, vibrant, and charged with possibility. And deep inside, Emily felt a quiet thrill, a whisper of adventure and longing that promised her heart that the coming days would challenge her, test her, and perhaps awaken a part of herself she had long forgotten. Over the next few days, Emily found herself thinking about Jason constantly. She would catch herself smiling at his words, replaying in her mind, or feeling a small thrill remembering the way he had listened so attentively. The cafe, once just a cozy spot on a rainy evening, had become a place she longed to visit. Every time she passed by it on her way home from work, she felt drawn inside by a force she couldn't explain. It wasn't about wanting to be unfaithful. It was about curiosity, about reconnecting with a part of herself that had been dormant for years. Emily began visiting the cafe more often. Each time she entered, Jason greeted her with that same warm smile, the one that made her feel both nervous and alive. They talked about simple things at first: books, music, even small jokes about their daily routines. But with every conversation, the connection grew stronger. Emily noticed details about him she hadn't expected: the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, how he seemed genuinely interested in everything she said, the small gestures of kindness that made the cafe feel like a world apart from her regular life. One afternoon, Jason mentioned an art gallery opening downtown. "It's a small exhibit, but I think you'd enjoy it," he said. Emily hesitated. She had never gone to an art gallery alone with someone outside of her circle, let alone someone she barely knew. It felt risky, exciting, and completely out of her comfort zone. But a part of her, the part she had ignored for so long, wanted to say yes. She wanted to feel alive, to step outside the safe, predictable life she had settled into. I think I'd like that," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. Jason's smile deepened, and he nodded. "Great, I'll send you the details. It's tomorrow evening. Hope you can make it," Emily agreed, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She left the cafe feeling both guilty and thrilled. She was married, yet she could not ignore the pull of something new, something that made her feel visible and alive again. The next evening, Emily dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit that made her feel confident. As she drove to the gallery, Portland's streets glistened with the last traces of rain. Her mind was a swirl of emotions: excitement, anticipation, and a little nervousness she couldn't shake. When she arrived at the gallery, she saw Jason waiting outside, holding the door for her. His presence was calming and energizing at the same time. The gallery was intimate, filled with soft lighting that highlighted paintings and sculptures in gentle, warm tones. Soft classical music played in the background, giving the space a quiet sophistication. Jason guided her through the exhibit, pointing out pieces that reminded him of stories they had shared at the cafe. Emily listened, fascinated not only by the art but also by his perspective. He seemed to see the world in a way that opened new doors in her mind. As they moved from room to room, Emily felt a closeness growing between them. It wasn't physical. It was emotional, subtle, and profound. She laughed at his witty observations, shared her own thoughts, found herself revealing parts of herself she rarely let anyone see. There was a connection and unspoken understanding that made her heart feel both light and heavy at the same time. Light because she was experiencing something new. Heavy because she felt the weight of her choices and the knowledge that she was risking the predictable safety of her marriage after what felt like hours. They paused near a painting of a sunset over a quiet harbor. Emily stared at the colors, feeling a sense of peace and longing she hadn't realized she missed. Jason turned to her and said softly, "I'm really glad you came tonight. I've enjoyed every moment with you." Emily felt a sudden warmth in her chest. It was not inappropriate, which human, real, and deeply moving. She smiled, realizing that she had allowed herself to feel alive in ways she hadn't for years. As the evening drew to a close, Jason walked her to her car. Rain had returned, light and steady, tapping on the roof and windshield. They paused near the curb, a quiet moment stretching between them. Their hands brushed briefly, a fleeting, innocent touch, but Emily felt the impact of it linger in her mind, a gentle shock of emotion. She looked up at him and saw in his eyes a reflection of the same feeling she had been holding inside. Neither spoke, yet the silence itself was meaningful. When Emily drove home, her mind raced. She replayed every detail of the evening. The laughter, the conversations, the warmth of Jason's presence, and this strange, thrilling pulse of connection. She also felt guilt. Daniel was at home, unaware of the storm of emotions stirring in his wife. She loved him, she reminded herself. But she realized that love and routine were not always enough to keep a heart fully alive. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Daniel slept beside her, steady and comforting, but Emily felt restless. She thought about the way Jason had listened to her, the way he had made her feel seen, and the way she had allowed herself to take a risk. Not a physical risk, not a betrayal, but an emotional risk. She had stepped outside her safe life and dared to experience something entirely new. Guilt and excitement wrestled within her. She knew that what she felt was not wrong in intention, but it was dangerous in its potential. Still, Emily could not deny the truth. She had been missing this kind of emotional spark for years. And now that she had felt it, she could not ignore it. She whispered to herself, "I took a risk today, and I think I needed it." In the following days, Emily's routine changed subtly. She found herself looking forward to her visits to the cafe, thinking about the gallery and replaying her conversations with Jason in her mind. She began to realize that life had more layers than she had allowed herself to explore. The risk she had taken had awakened something inside her: curiosity, a longing, and a willingness to step outside the comfort of her routine. Yet, at the same time, she knew she had to be careful. Daniel was her husband, her anchor, and she did not want to hurt him. This was a delicate balance, exploring emotions, curiosity, and connection, while honoring the life she had built. Emily felt as though she was walking on a fine line between discovery and danger, excitement and regret, desire and loyalty. By the end of the week, she realized that this was only the beginning. The risk she had taken, the decision to step into Jason's world, to allow herself to feel something she had long ignored, had opened doors she could not close. She knew that the coming days would test her heart, challenge her sense of right and wrong, and force her to confront emotions she had never allowed herself to explore. Emily felt a strange mixture of anticipation and fear. She had tasted freedom and emotional connection outside her usual life. Yet she also knew she could not ignore the responsibilities and commitments she had at home. This balance, delicate and challenging, would define the choices she would face. And deep down, she understood that the risk she had taken, while small in action, was monumental in its impact. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly alive. Her heart was awake, her mind alert, and her spirit curious. She didn't yet know what the next step would be, but she knew one thing. She had taken a risk, and that risk had reminded her that life, even in its quietest moments, could still surprise, thrill, and awaken the soul after the gallery night. Emily couldn't stop thinking about Jason. The emotional connection she had felt lingered in her mind, like a song she couldn't forget. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It had grown into something deeper, an awareness of herself she hadn't realized she had lost. She felt alive, but at the same time conflicted. Daniel was at home, loving and dependable, unaware of the storm of feelings swirling inside his wife. Emily began to understand that this was more than a fleeting thrill. It was a moment of self-discovery, and she needed to face it honestly. She found herself visiting the cafe again more often than she had intended. Every visit carried an unspoken tension. Jason was warm and attentive, never crossing any boundaries. But there was a subtle electricity between them. He seemed to understand her without her having to explain. And Emily felt a sense of freedom in talking to someone who truly listened. She shared stories, dreams, and fears she had never voiced to anyone else. Each conversation revealed layers of herself she had ignored in the routine of her marriage and work life. One afternoon, while they were talking about books, Jason mentioned a quiet park he loved to walk through after work. He described the winding paths, the small benches tucked under trees, and the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves in the evening. Emily felt a flutter of excitement. Visiting the park with him would be another step outside her comfort zone. But she felt a strong desire to explore this emotional connection further. "I'd love to see it," she said, smiling. Jason's eyes lit up, and he suggested they meet the next evening. Emily felt her heart race. She knew it was risky, emotionally speaking, but a part of her wanted to embrace it. This wasn't about betrayal in action. It was about understanding her own feelings and the depth of her own heart. The following evening, Emily walked to the park, the crisp air refreshing against her skin. Jason was waiting near the entrance, and when she saw him, she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. They walked side by side along the winding paths, talking quietly about everything and nothing. The world seemed to shrink around them. The city, the apartment, the routine life, all of it faded into the background. Here in this park, Emily felt fully herself, unguarded and honest, as they reached a small bench under a large oak tree. They sat down, and Emily felt a calm she hadn't felt in years. Jason spoke gently about his life, his dreams, and even the struggles he had faced. Emily listened, fascinated by his openness. She realized that this connection, though complicated, was meaningful. It wasn't about physical attraction, it was about emotional honesty and understanding. About sharing parts of oneself that were often hidden. Emily felt a mix of guilt and exhilaration. She loved Daniel, yet she couldn't deny the intensity of her feelings with Jason. She understood that emotions were complex, and the heart didn't always follow simple rules. She had taken a risk by allowing herself to feel this connection, and the consequences were not yet clear. But she also realized that avoiding her emotions entirely would leave her stagnant, disconnected from herself. That evening, as they walked back toward the park entrance, Jason stopped and looked at her. "Emily, I know this is complicated," he said softly. "I just want you to know that whatever you feel is okay. You don't have to hide it." His words struck her. They weren't pressuring her. They were honest and respectful. Emily felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the raw emotional clarity she hadn't experienced in years. Driving home, Emily reflected on the day. She felt the weight of her emotions: excitement, guilt, longing, and awareness. She realized that what she was experiencing was more than attraction. It was a mirror showing her parts of herself she had neglected. The risk she had taken engaging with someone outside her routine life was teaching her about honesty, emotional depth, and the choices she had to make about her future. That night, Lying in bed beside Daniel, Emily felt a pang of guilt. She loved him deeply, and she valued the life they had built together. Yet, she also understood that she had been asleep emotionally for too long. This awakening didn't make her a bad person. It made her human. She whispered softly to herself, "I need to understand my heart before I can truly honor the life I have." In the days that followed, Emily's internal conflict grew. She loved Daniel, but she couldn't ignore the emotional intensity she felt with Jason. She began journaling, trying to untangle her feelings. She wrote about longing, excitement, and the thrill of taking a risk she had never dared before. Each word helped her clarify her emotions, revealing the depth of her own desires and the courage it took to face them honestly. One evening, she decided to call Jason. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, I need to talk." He suggested meeting at a quiet cafe near the park, a neutral place where they could speak openly. Emily arrived early, her heart racing. When Jason walked in and saw her, he smiled gently. "Emily," he said softly, "I'm glad you called." They sat down and Emily began to speak, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier as she continued. She confessed that she had taken a risk by exploring her feelings, that she had allowed herself to experience emotions she hadn't felt in years. She didn't reveal any actions that would betray Daniel. Only her honest feelings, her curiosity, and the awakening of her own heart. Jason listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. His eyes conveyed understanding, patience, and respect. Emily felt a release, a weight lifted by speaking her truth aloud. She realized that emotions, when faced honestly, could be powerful teachers. Jason's presence was not about replacing Daniel. It was about helping her understand herself, her needs, and the life she wanted to lead. He nodded thoughtfully, saying, "Emily, what you feel is real, and it matters. But you need to make choices that honor your life and your heart. This is about understanding yourself, not rushing into decisions." His words resonated deeply. Emily knew he was right. She had to decide what truly mattered: her commitment to Daniel, her marriage, and the life they had built, or the thrill of emotional exploration outside of it. But she also knew that ignoring her feelings entirely would leave her disconnected from herself. She needed to find balance, to honor both her emotions and her responsibilities. That night, Emily lay in bed, reflecting on her conversation with Jason. She realized that taking the risk, allowing herself to feel, to explore, and to confront her own heart had been necessary. It had not led to betrayal, but to clarity. She understood that emotions were not always straightforward. Thus, that love required courage, honesty, and self-awareness. Emily's heart was heavy with questions, but it was also light with understanding. She had faced her feelings without judgment, and in doing so, had opened the door to personal growth. She understood that her journey was not about choosing between two men, it was about understanding herself, acknowledging her desires, and making conscious choices about the life she wanted to lead. As she drifted to sleep, Emily felt a sense of calm amid the turmoil. The risk she had taken had led her to clarity, emotional depth, and a renewed understanding of her own heart. She knew that the coming days would challenge her further, but she also knew she was ready to face them with honesty and courage. For the first time in years, 80 days after Emily's conversation with Jason were quiet yet full of reflection. She spent long walks alone, thinking about her feelings, her marriage, and the choices she would have to make. Every step reminded her that life was complicated and that emotions could not be ignored. She loved Daniel deeply. Yet she also realized that allowing herself to explore new connections had awakened something within her: curiosity, a longing, and a need for emotional honesty she could no longer deny. Emily returned to her routine at work, but her mind was never fully there. She found herself replaying moments with Jason in her head: the gallery, the walks, the quiet conversations that had stirred her heart. She also remembered Daniel's steady presence, his quiet support, and the small gestures of love he showed every day. It became clear to her that she didn't want to lose what she had with Daniel. What she wanted was to rekindle the connection that had dimmed over time. to rediscover this spark in her marriage that had been buried under routine and predictability. One evening, Emily decided to take a deliberate step. She returned home early from work, planning to spend the evening entirely with Daniel. She prepared his favorite dinner, setting the table carefully, lighting a small candle in the center and playing soft music in the background. She wanted this night to be different, intentional, and full of presence. She wanted to show Daniel not only her love, but also her renewed commitment to their life together. When Daniel arrived, tired from his day, he noticed the effort immediately. His eyes softened and a small smile appeared. "Wow, this looks wonderful," he said, genuinely touched. Emily smiled back, feeling her heart lift. She realized that the risk she had taken with her emotions had not only helped her understand herself, but also reminded her of the value of her life with Daniel. She wasn't betraying him. She was choosing clarity, honesty, and love. They ate together, talking about their days, their dreams, and even their frustrations. Emily shared little stories from her work, moments that had amused or challenged her, while Daniel laughed and added his own anecdotes. The evening flowed naturally, without tension or fear, yet Emily felt a subtle thrill in the intimacy they shared. This was what she had been missing, not excitement outside of her marriage, but presence, connection, and emotional honesty within it. After dinner, Daniel suggested they go for a short walk. The evening air was crisp, and the streets were quiet. Emily took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth and security she had sometimes taken for granted. Walking side by side, she realized that love could evolve, that it could be rekindled even after years of routine. The risk she had taken exploring her feelings with Jason, confronting her own heart, had given her the clarity she needed to appreciate what she already had as they returned home. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude. She understood that life was full of choices, and while temptation and curiosity could appear, the most meaningful decisions were those made with honesty and awareness. She looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully later that night and felt a renewed sense of love. This wasn't about denying her feelings. It was about understanding them, learning from them, and choosing a path that honored both her heart and her commitments. The next few days were filled with small but intentional gestures. Emily made an effort to connect more deeply with Daniel, noticing the little things she had once overlooked, the way he smiled when he was happy, the way he held her hand when he wanted comfort, the subtle kindnesses he showed without expecting recognition. Each observation reminded her why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. It was as if the emotional risk she had taken with Jason had acted as a mirror, reflecting the value of her marriage and her life. Emily also took time for herself. She journaled daily, writing about her feelings, the lessons she had learned, and the ways she wanted to grow. The act of putting her thoughts into words helped her process the emotional intensity she had experienced and allowed her to approach her life with greater clarity. She realized that love, curiosity, and desire were not mutually exclusive. They could coexist, but only if approached with honesty and care. One afternoon, Daniel noticed Emily sitting by the window, writing in her journal. "What are you writing about?" he asked gently. Emily closed the journal and smiled. "Just thinking about us," she said. Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning. Emily didn't need to explain the risk she had taken or the feelings she had explored. What mattered was the commitment she had renewed and the love she wanted to nurture. Over the following weeks, Emily and Daniel made small but meaningful changes in their life together. They planned dates, took weekend trips, and spent time talking about their dreams and aspirations. Emily felt alive, not because of excitement outside her marriage, but because of the emotional honesty and intentionality she had brought into it. She had faced her curiosity, explored her feelings, and made a conscious choice to invest fully in her relationship. Emily also maintained a sense of gratitude for Jason, without letting it interfere with her life. She recognized that the connection she had shared with him was valuable not for romance, but for self-awareness. It had shown her that she could still feel deeply, that she could take emotional risks, and that she could confront her desires without harming those she loved. In that sense, the experience had been transformative. teaching her lessons she would carry forward into her marriage. One evening, as Emily and Daniel sat together on their couch, sipping tea, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She realized that taking the emotional risk had not led to betrayal. It had led to clarity, understanding, and a renewed commitment to love. She leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, and whispered softly, "I love you more than ever." Daniel smiled, holding her close, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt completely at home in her own life. As she reflected on the journey she had taken, Emily understood that life was full of moments that tested the heart. Some risks were necessary not to escape, not to seek forbidden thrills, but to understand oneself and one's capacity for love. She had taken such a risk, and it had shown her that love, when nurtured with honesty and presence, could be deeper, more vibrant, and more fulfilling than she had imagined. Emily knew that life would always bring challenges and temptations, but she also knew that she was stronger for having faced her emotions head-on. She had explored the unknown, confronted her heart, and returned to her marriage with a renewed sense of purpose. The risk she had taken had not destroyed her life, had enriched it, reminding her that love was not static but a living, evolving force that required courage, awareness, and intention. In the quiet of her apartment, Emily smiled to herself, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She had learned that sometimes taking a risk was not about escaping, but about returning to what truly mattered with clarity, depth, and renewed commitment. She had faced her desires, explored her miley, felt fully awake, fully alive, fully aware of the path she had to navigate.